Hello, Professor and class. My name is Nicholas, and I will be doing a Chapter 10 presentation. Chapter 10 is labeled Minority Groups and the U.S. Society, Themes, Patterns, and the Future. The chapter begins off with a re-examination of the major themes and concepts to determine what conclusions can be derived from the information of the past 9 chapters in the book. It states that our understandings are limited by who we are, where we come from, and what we have experienced. It also states that we must face the ugly realities of the past and present so we can surpass our own limitations to find our own understandings. Oscar Hamlin in 1951 stated, "Once I thought to write a history of the minority groups in America, then I discovered that the minority groups were American history." The chapter continues with the importance of substance technology. One of the most important sociological ideas that is large social, political, and economic forces shape the dominant minority relations. To understand the minority groups, we need to understand the history of the United States. Substance technology is the most basic force shaping society and the relationships between the dominant and minority groups. Minority relations were bent to the demands of bland, hungry, labor-intensive agrarian technology. The agrarian era ended in the 19th century as the new technologies of industrial revolution increased and the productivity of the economy and eventually changed every aspect of life in the United States. The oppressive system of control gave way to the competitive systems of group relations. As the U.S. developed, new minority groups were created as well. Immigrants helped farm the Great Plains, mine the riches of the West, and above all, supplied the armies of labor needed for industrialization. Descendants of European immigrants benefited the most from the continuing industrialization of economy, rising slowly in the social class structure as the economy grew and matured, while other immigrants, such as those from Asia and Latin America, were not so fortunate. Some groups formed enclaves, like the Chinese and Japanese. Others supplied low-paid labor. As social minority groups entered the workforce, as the European American ethnic group began to climb the occupational structure at the time when the supply of manual and unskilled jobs were dwindling. So unfortunately, the other minority groups did not have the same experiences and access. Immigration to the United States has been quite high for the past decades, bringing highly educated professionals to help staff the post-industrial economy, as well as the undocumented immigrant who works in the secondary labor market, the enclaves, and the irregular economy. The emerging information-based high-tech society is unlikely to offer many opportunities to people with lower levels of education and few occupational skills. The perpetuation of the status quo will bar a significant percentage of the population from participating fully in the mainstream economy. Shifts in substance technology also helped transform gender relations and women's lives in particular. However, women still face gender gaps in wages, glass ceilings, sexual harassment, and other gender-related challenges and limitations, while men, as a whole, not anything else, still reap invisible privileges from intimate family relations to corporate boardrooms. Whoa. Additionally, non-heterosexuals have benefited from the greater acceptance and inclusion associated with more education. Let's start over. Additionally, non-heterosexuals have benefited from the greater acceptance and inclusions associated with more education, more advanced industrial societies. The importance of the contact situation, group competition, and power. This is the third section of chapter 10. Contact situation, again, is the conditions under which the minority group and dominant group first come into contact with each other. Bonner's distinction as an organizing principle and covered American minority groups in approximate order from colonized to immigrant. For example, prejudice, racism, and discrimination against African Americans remain a formidable force in contemporary America, even though they have softened into more subtle forms. But in contrast, discrimination against European Americans have nearly disappeared with the exception of anti-Semitism. Non-white immigrant groups bring few resources and low levels of human capital, non-white immigrant groups who bring few resources and low levels of healing capital experience segmented assimilation and find themselves in situations resembling those of the colonized minority groups. However, on the other end of the spectrum for non-white immigrants, those with higher education, money, likely experience find themselves in some version of middle-class suburbia. This is from one end of the spectrum, Haitians, to the other, Asian Indians. Noel's hypothesis, with the three conditions again are ethnocentrism, competition, and differential in power, are present in context situation. As competition increases, so does prejudice and greater discrimination, and differential in power determines the outcome of the initial context situation in which group becomes dominant and which becomes the minority. Minority groups, by definition, have fewer power resources, but they characteristically use what they have to improve their situations. Minority status still controls relatively few resources and is limited in its ability to pursue its self-interest. Many limitations are economic and related to social class. They simply lack the resources to finance political campaigns for reform to exert significant political pressure. The powerlessness of minority groups today is the legacy of the context situations created in the first place. Context situations set agendas for group relations that continue to exert influence centuries after their initial meeting. Competition and differences in power resources will continue to shape intergroup relations well into the future, and because they are so basic and consequential, jobs will continue to be the primary objects of competition. Some of our most important concepts do not fit all the dominant minority group situations. No context situation for women and men exists, or other gender-identified people. There is no time in history when they did not coexist together. However, researchers have documented persistent patterns of inequality, marginalization, and degeneration of both women and the LGBTQIA people seem to fit Bonner's category of colonized minority groups. Bonner's hypothesis may not be literally applicable to women and the LGBTQIA people, but Noel's concepts of power and competition are essential to the group situations. For women, American society has made a formal commitment to equality many decades ago, but acceptance and an end to stigma continues for the people of the LGBTQIA community. The importance of intersectionality. Minority group members vary from one another by age, gender, region of residence, level of education, urban versus rural residence, political ideology, religion, and other ways. The problems of some members may not be the problem of others. Studies of minority groups by U.S. social scientists have focused predominantly on men and less on women. As a result, women have had much less access to leadership roles and higher status positions compared to men. Generalizations about all women and all men seldom conform to reality, and intersectionality approach women, girls, LGBTQIA, etc. Gender, class, race, ethnicity, and sexual orientation can intersect to create especially heavy burdens for some people. Assimilation and pluralism. There is little evidence to support the idea that assimilation is a linear, inevitable process. Also, without support is the belief that a simple, ordered relationship exists between the various stages of assimilation: acculturation, integration into public institutions, integration into the private sector, and so forth. We have seen that some groups integrated before they acculturated, other groups have become more committed to their ethnic or racial identity over time, and still others have been acculturated for generations, but are not any closer to full integration. Since the 1960s, many minority group persons have questioned the wisdom of becoming part of the sociocultural structure built by the systematic exploitation of minority groups. Group by group state of acculturation and integration. African Americans are highly acculturated. However, in the terms of integration, and it's the complete opposite. Well, we're not complete opposite. It's contrastically a mixed picture. Native Americans are less acculturated than the African Americans, and some tribes are trying to preserve their cultures and languages. Some measures of integration show improvement, but many Native Americans are among the most isolated and impoverished in the United States. Hispanic Americans are also less acculturated than African Americans. Traditions and language have been sustained by exclusion and constant immigration. Some intergroups move closer to equality, like Cubans. However, the majority of them do not. Asian Americans, like Hispanic Americans, are highly variable in the extent of assimilation. Only European American ethnic groups seem to have approximate the traditional models of assimilation, and acculturation has not been reached between men and women. Some measure of equality exists, like in education, but there are other gaps, large gaps, that still persist, like wages. The realities of pluralism, inequality, and ethnic and racial identity persist to the extent that the American promise of a truly open opportunity structure continues to fail. We need to remember that in and of itself, diversity is no more bad than unity is good. Our society has grown to a position of global prominence despite, or perhaps because of, our diversity. To this heady mix of diversity in race, ethnicity, language, and culture, we must add the dimensions of gender and sexual orientation and their infinite intersections and combinations with group membership. We need to focus on the issues that confront us with an honest recognition of the past and the economic, political, and social forces that have shaped us. Minority group progress and the ideology of American individualism. Minority groups can be found at the highest levels of success, affluence, and prestige, suggesting that the U.S. has become more tolerant and open. Although prejudice in all its forms unquestionably exists, research documents a general decline in overt racism. Many people now express the same racist and sexist feelings in subtler ways called modern or symbolic racism. The individualistic view of social mobility is consistent with the human capital perspective and the traditional melting pot view of assimilation. Together, these ideologies present a powerful and widely shared perspective on the nature of minority group problems. The marginalization of the minority group labor force reflects the essence of modern American capitalism. Effective strategies of pursuing equality require strong in-group cohesion and networks of cooperation and not heroic individual effort. Immigration to the US is and always has been a group process. Survival and success in American for all minority groups has had more to do with group processes than with individual will or motivation. And finally, a final word, conclusion, a final word. U.S. society and its minority groups are linked in fractious unity. By harnessing the labor and energy of these minority groups, the U.S. has grown prosperous and powerful, but the benefits have flowed disproportionately to members of the dominant group. Minority groups have made progress, yet has stalled well short of equality. Faith in assimilation and the belief that success in America is open to all who simply try hard enough has proved inadequate. Only by asking the proper questions, realistically and honestly, can we hope to find answers that will help our society fulfill its promises to the millions who are currently excluded from achieving the American dream. A society that finds a way to deal fairly and humanely with issues of diversity and difference, prejudice and inequality, exclusion and marginalization, and racism and discrimination can provide a sorely needed model for other nations, indeed for the world.